In a contested GOP primary, it's not enough to be a Trump Republican. You have to have the Trump good housekeeping seal of approval. And last night's results prove that again. Keisha Lance Bottoms won the Georgia Democratic gubernatorial primary going away and now stands on the precipice of history. She joins us. It was never a cold case, but it had Cold War overtones. After 30 years, the U.S. indicts former Cuban leader Raúl Castro in the deaths of 3 Americans shot down by Cuban fighter pilots over international waters. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in New York, and we'll be here for the rest of the week. Welcome to the Takeout. Rhino or YOLO? The Trump White House can't stand what it calls rhinos, Republicans in name only. Now, that acronym predated Trump's involvement in GOP politics, but it has become, what's the word? Weaponized by the Trump White House against Republicans who fail the Trump loyalty test. You know, the one that's delivered almost daily? To President Trump, rhinos are by definition weak because they are not strong for him. Eradicating rhinos from GOP ranks started in his first term as a kind of preference. Now it is a borderline obsession, as evidenced by the throttling of Kentucky Republican Congressman Thomas Massie last night. Tens of millions of dollars were dedicated to Massie's defeat, ordered up by Trump, who added, for good measure, a torrent of social media invective. Massie is now thus a victim of this purity campaign, and he may be rethinking his political options. And in that light, he might have new company, such as Louisiana GOP Senator Bill Cassidy, vanquished in Saturday's primary by a Trump-endorsed challenger. Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn may join the ranks of the replaceables Tuesday when he faces freshly Trump-endorsed rival Ken Paxton. In their victimhood, these Republicans may enter a new phase of political life. YOLO Republicanism, you only live once. Unencumbered by the burdens of persistent loyalty tests, they may find ways to defy or frustrate the Trump agenda. Take Cassidy, for instance. Yesterday, late in the afternoon, for the first time, he voted with Democrats to invoke the War Powers Act to limit Trump's war with Iran. Could Cornyn be far behind on matters like, the $1 billion Trump ballroom, or a new fund for supposed victims of Biden lawfare, or that tacked-on codicil that shields Trump, his families, and affiliated businesses from any pending IRS investigations or audits? These, my friends, are choices a YOLO political lifestyle are made of. Who knows, you might even see TikTok or Instagram videos memorializing newfound political freedoms. Or maybe it will just be the occasional icy no vote on the Senate floor, legislative revenge, best served cold. All of this, of course, is speculative, but only slightly. And for evidence of that, check Senator Cassidy's X account right now. But for precision that only numbers can bring, we turn to your friend and mine, Anthony Salvanto, our Executive Director of Surveys and Elections, for a recap of the primaries last night. Anthony, tell us about the 4th District of Kentucky, Ed Galrine and Thomas Massie.
No FOMO here. You're not going to miss out on the data.
Exactly, no FOMO.
This is what, look, the 4th District here, we all watched this all last night. I want to talk about what ultimately was the turnout in this race, right? So we're at 106,000 votes. Now, in the scope of things in Kentucky, that's not a lot. Even in the Kentucky 4th, that's not a lot. But compared to other primaries, that is a 2x turnout, right? Other primaries, even for Massie, have had maybe 50, maybe 60,000 votes. Now, I know what you're going to say. We've been doing this a long time. Come on, Ant, those weren't competitive primaries. What's the comparison here? It's this. And that is the central question of the midterms, I think, is whether the Trump campaign, the Republican apparatus, can turn out voters when Donald Trump is not on the ballot. And I think when you see turnout like this and all the money they spent to do that, it's going to be taken as evidence that, in fact, they can. Unlike, say, 2018, when they couldn't, this is going to be, for a lot of Republicans, that kind of sign.
Underlying that, will there be Massie Galrine voters in November? Will be interesting to watch that. How about Georgia? We had primaries, gubernatorial and senatorial on the Republican side. What do we make?
I'm going to start with the Senate one, because the key here is nobody hit 50%. And in Georgia, Collins and Dooley now go to a runoff to see who faces Jon Ossoff in November. The reason that's important is there's a couple of schools of thought here. Number one, we're going to watch Georgia because it's going to be a crucial Senate battleground. Democrats need to hold it. Does a runoff mean that they compete and beat each other up for another few weeks and Ossoff just gets out his message? Or does it mean that they get lots of attention for a couple of weeks, get more energy on the base, and then that rolls into November? That is an open question, but is the question to watch in Georgia next couple of weeks.
Preview next week's runoff in Texas. Ken Paxton, John Cornyn.
Will do. Well, it comes back to what you talked about at the top, right? You've got the Trump endorsement. That's probably going to be a big factor here if past is prologue. We already know that. And here is your map of how they did in the last primary. This, I think, is evidence you're going to watch the central cities to see if Cornyn can run up enough vote. Otherwise, Paxton is probably poised to do well all across the rural counties.
Precision in numbers. Anthony Salvanto, as always, I thank you, my friend. Georgia Democratic candidate for governor Keisha Lance Bottoms joins me now to discuss her primary victory. Congratulations, first of all. Were you expecting to surpass the 50% margin and avoid a runoff?
I did, Major. I believed in our campaign. I knew that we were doing the work. We just always said that we were going to run like we were 30 points down and not 30 points ahead internally. We believed that we would pass the 50% mark, and just very pleased that we got to 56%. I think it sends a very loud and clear message that we have a very powerful campaign that's ready to take on whomever comes out of this Republican primary in November.
Do you see any difference between Burt Jones or Rick Jackson, the two Republicans who will be in the runoff?
Just in terms of their running toward Trump's MAGA agenda, they're equally awful in that regard. Donald Trump has already endorsed Burt Jones, and Rick Jackson is spending a lot of money to try and curry favor with Donald Trump. So they are as MAGA gets. And, as I'm moving around the state, that's not what the people of this state want to hear. They want to hear how we are going to address these everyday issues that are impacting their lives: cost of living, access or lack thereof to health care, education, access to jobs. Those are the things that people are concerned about, not this extreme agenda that Donald Trump continues to push forward in our state.
If you are elected, you would be the first African-American woman ever elected governor in Georgia. And if I believe correctly, according to my quick research, the first African-American governor woman in the entire country. Is that potential history central to your campaign or incidental?
It's not. I mean, obviously, I'm a Black woman every day, so I don't go around thinking about the label of being a Black woman. What I'm thinking about right now is just how I'm going to deliver for the people across this state. So obviously, the historical context of it could be significant. But when I am talking to voters across this state, their concerns are about how a leader will deliver for their communities. And the question of whether it would be a woman, a Black woman, doesn't come up. It's not a topic of discussion. It's just about how will you make my life better, and why should I vote for you, and what will I get in return for it?
What effect does it have that Brian Kemp is not going to be on the ballot? Because Stacey Abrams tried to make that history twice, failed both times. Brian Kemp is formidable in the state of Georgia in Republican and statewide politics. He's not on the ballot. How big of a difference does that make?
Well, it's an open seat, so I think that in and of itself is always an advantage to anyone who's not challenging an incumbent. There are some inherent challenges when you go against an incumbent. So the fact that it's an open seat gives us even an even better opportunity to pick up the seat. And again, we came out of last night very, very strong, winning, I believe, and I haven't seen the final numbers. I believe we won every county with the exception of 158 counties. And we were able to get a lot of crossover appeal with our campaign. And again, it's just been about talking about those issues that matter most to people.
Is the Joe Biden endorsement for you important? Because there is a sense I have from some Republicans in Georgia that the Biden-Harris name is still toxic in Georgia politics.
No, that's not what I'm picking up, especially from the Democratic base. People know how the Biden-Harris administration delivered for this state, but at the end of the day, an endorsement from a president is a wonderful thing to have, but really it's about people voting for me in the state, talking to people, earning their votes one by one. So I'm honored to have had that endorsement, but it's not stopping me from trying to earn votes of everyday regular working folk in this state.
If you're elected, inflation and cost of living will be a big challenge. You can't do very much about it as governor, but what would you try to do?
There are a few things that we can do. There's a gas tax that the governor has the opportunity to suspend in the state. It's suspended right now. I will extend that. Also, looking at how we can make housing more affordable in this state, investing in infrastructure, working with builders who specialize in affordable and workforce housing, whether it be through low interest loans or grants for homeowners. Also, expanding Medicaid in this state. Not expanding Medicaid has cost a lot of people a lot of money in this state. 9 rural hospitals have closed, and we're leaving federal dollars on the table because we've not expanded Medicaid. People are having to travel sometimes upwards for an hour or more to receive specialized care. Half our counties don't even have OBGYNs and pediatricians. So there are several things that we're going to tackle head on, including teachers' pay. Our average teacher starting pay in the state is $43,000 a year. We want to raise that to $60,000 a year and eliminate state income taxes for our teachers. So we've already started giving a lot of thought as to what we can do on day one when that budget comes from the governor's office, and making sure that our priorities are reflected accordingly.
Keisha Lance Bottoms, thank you for the time.
Thank you.
In Congressman Thomas Massie's concession speech last night, he made something that he thought was a joke about AIPAC. AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee and its financial backing of his opponent, Ed Galrein's campaign. Listen.
I would have come out sooner, but I had to call my opponent and concede, and it took a while to find Ed Galrein in Tel Aviv.
Nevada Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen joins us now. She just introduced legislation with Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma to strengthen federal efforts to fight anti-Semitism. Senator, I'm glad to have you with us. Evaluate what you just heard from Thomas Massie on your own personal anti-Semitism scale.
Well, I can tell you, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for highlighting this, because it doesn't matter whether the comments come from the left, the right, or the center. These are just subtle ways, dog whistles of anti-Semitism. We see it every day, and what that does is give a permission structure for people to be more and more anti-Semitic, increase that hateful speech, and we see it turn to violence every single day. According to the ADL, over the last few years, particularly since October 7th, domestic violent extremism in the form of anti-Semitism has risen exponentially, part of the big reason for the bill that James Lankford and I introduced just yesterday.
How about Maureen Galindo, Texas' 35th congressional district? She is getting quite a bit of attention today, and there are some Democrats saying that she's being propped up by Republicans, but nevertheless, she said, among other things, that if she were to be elected to Congress, she would push for an ICE facility, quote, to be a prison for American Zionists.
Yeah. Again, it doesn't matter where it comes from. This is horrific speech. It should be condemned by everyone and propped up by no one. And so, again, I don't care left, right, or center. We cannot be part of supporting anyone with this hateful rhetoric, and certainly not our opposing parties. We have to call it out. Like I said, that's the reason James Lankford and I, on a bipartisan basis, over the last 7 years that I've been in Congress, have worked on so many things to be sure that we're protecting not just Jewish communities, but religious communities across this country.
What about Chris Robb, who won the congressional district primary in Pennsylvania's 3rd congressional district last night? He's a critic of AIPAC and support for Israel financially, and he's hung out with Hassan Piker.
Yeah, again, whoever you ask me about, it is all wrong. Hateful speech. It goes amongst. It just trickles out into everything, everywhere. And I can tell my own personal stories of being a child, being called a dirty Jew, of being a senator. You don't want to hear the voicemails that come to my office. I've had someone in prison now who threatened to my office and threatened me to say they're going to finish the job that Hitler started. But instead of backing down, we need to stand up and fight harder to protect not just the Jewish community for anti-Semitism, but Jews are just the canary in the coal mine. All forms of hate. It's awful, it's unconscionable, and it should never be illuminated or supported.
And what your legislation would seek to do is protect college students, also Jewish centers of religious observance, and create an online tracking mechanism. What's about the online tracking mechanism you and Senator Langford want?
And so this is a coordinated federal response in 3 areas. Like you said, college campuses where our kids are getting it, our houses of worship, not just Jewish institutions. We saw, sadly, what happened in San Diego just a few days ago, the Islamic Center. This is all houses of worship and support our law enforcement to protect vulnerable communities. And the online platforms, we know that they can really foment hate. So what we're asking for, large platforms, more than 50 million people subscribed, that they will report to us what they're doing to track anti-Semitism, how they're stopping it, how they're stopping people from going down that rabbit hole where we protect free speech, but then when it turns to violence or inciting violence or going past, wanting to put people in internment camps, wanting to finish what Hitler started, you can go ahead and name that. That isn't protected speech. So we want to see what they're doing, have them report to us, and maybe that will be insightful of what the platforms have to do overall and what we may or may not be able to legislate.
Senator, a couple of things that are right before the body currently. A question about some $1 billion in possible funding for the president's ballroom. Also, this creation of an anti-weaponization fund, though I know many Democrats, perhaps yourself included, might call it a slush fund for Trump supporters. What is the status of those two, and what are you going to do about them?
Well, I'll just tell you this, $1 billion for a ballroom, billionaires are going to eat on gold plates when people can't even put gas in their car or buy their groceries or pay their rent. It's ridiculous. We didn't need a ballroom. Trump destroyed history in the East Wing, and he did it again like everything else. He doesn't care about the rules. He doesn't care about a Constitution or authorities. And then the I think it's 1776, almost nearly $1.8 billion of a slush fund. No oversight for the president to decide basically who he's going to give away billions of dollars of the taxpayer money to, number one. Oh, and by the way, he also tucked in there that himself and his family will be, for the rest of eternity, never be allowed to their taxes be audited or so many other things. And so this is absolutely ridiculous. It's never been done in the history of the United States where we've just given a president, any president, the ability to just hand out billions of dollars to whomever he wants, whenever he wants, without audit, and also to control his own personal prosecution. No one is above the law. If his taxes need to be audited or he's hiding something, then the American people need to see that.
Nevada Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen. Senator, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Former Cuban leader Raúl Castro and 5 others were indicted by a U.S. grand jury in Florida on murder and conspiracy charges. That's over Cuba's shooting down of planes operated by a humanitarian group way back in 1996. 3 Americans and a U.S. resident were killed in that action. Here was an acting Attorney General Todd Blanche earlier today.
Nations and their leaders cannot be permitted to target Americans, kill them, and not face accountability. President Trump is committed to restoring a very simple but important principle. If you kill Americans, we will pursue you, no matter who you are, no matter what title you hold, and in this case, no matter how much time has passed.
CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan joins me now. Margaret, what more do we know about these charges and specifically Raúl Castro's role?
Well, Major, I have read the indictment here, and while it lays out in specifics the extent of the spying mechanics that were used to try to infiltrate Brothers to the Rescue, that humanitarian aid organization that was sending those unarmed Cessna planes close to, sometimes into Cuban airspace to try to help migrants from Cuba who were leaving. It doesn't really detail any new information in any clear way that would explain why 30 years after the alleged crime, now Raul Castro is being charged. It does point out in here, though, that in terms of the chain of command, any order to kill would go up to Raul Castro, who was then the defense minister, and his brother Fidel, who was at that time president. But back in 1996, there weren't charges brought by the Clinton administration. There was action taken. But there is in here also some reference to the fact that this was an ongoing operation by this humanitarian aid group. And frankly, it has been documented that they were warned of the potential risk of going this close to and sometimes into Cuban airspace. So it may be something that comes up in the prosecution. Cuban officials are pointing to FAA records talking about, the then Clinton White House warning the FAA not to sometimes let some of these planes take off. So it may be a complicated case to get to an actual conviction. But as you said, this is a grand jury indictment, and it's really a statement in many ways, Major, about intent and certainly about the frustration that the 94-year-old Raul Castro still remains very much influential, even though he no longer runs the country.
And Margaret, as I understand it, Cuba doesn't have an extradition agreement with the United States, and this would complicate already deeply complicated diplomatic relationships between the two countries, pressure campaign on the economic front, suggestions of possible military action. This all folds into that.
The timing here is certainly something that makes you connect all those dots, right? To say that perhaps this DOJ action is not separate from the pressure campaign that the Trump administration has been launching in recent months to try to force the regime to change its ways to open up that communist system. The Secretary of State has announced a number of new sanctions on the military intelligence leaders of that country. The CIA director just last week was in Havana, as you and I discussed, really sending the message that they need to expel U.S. adversaries like China and Russia who have listening posts there to spy on the United States. So all these things seem to be coming together at the same time. I should point out, it's not that this alleged crime went unanswered. Back in 2003, some of those who were actually involved in the operation itself in terms of the pilots were charged in the United States. But no U.S. president went to the Castro's doorstep, as this president has chosen to do in this moment. And it was very interesting, Major, in listening to that press conference to hear the Republican Senator Moody from Florida and Todd Blanche and others take the podium and refer back to Obama administration policies, drawing a contrast between President Obama attending a baseball game with Raul Castro as he tried to persuade him to open up the country versus Trump, who is sanctioning and indicting him to try to get to the same outcome.
Compare and contrast. Margaret Brennan, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Still to come on The Takeout, the fragile ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran. What are we hearing from President Trump and the Iranian regime on the state of the conflict? Plus, the NAACP's push for a boycott of NCAA programs in several southern states over the issue of voting rights, the potential impact this could have on student athletes, universities, and sports. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Takeout. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps today warned that if the United States or Israel resume military attacks, it would push the war, quote, beyond the region. President Trump, for his part today, said the conflict is in its, quote, final stages. The president and founder of the Eurasia Group, Ian Bremmer, joins me now. Ian, I promise we'll get to Iran in a second. But last week, President Trump was in China. This week, Russia's Vladimir Putin is in China. Help me do what you do best. Separate the signal from the noise, because there's lots of noisy visuals from Trump in Beijing last week and Putin there this week. What's key about what's going on this week?
Putin doesn't have many friends. He just had his victory day parade, and almost no one showed up. He had to shut down the internet, getting people off Telegram and onto a state-based network, and it's because the war's not going well, and the Ukrainians can hit him harder. So he's showing up in Beijing to say, hey, I'm still relevant. I'm going to be welcomed by the most powerful leader of the world, even if it's not the most powerful country, Xi Jinping in China, right after Trump goes. There wasn't much that was substantive that was agreed to between the two countries. The Russians desperately want to build energy infrastructure to take more of their energy to China, and that continues to be a very slow and difficult negotiation.
Ian, evaluate where you believe things are with Iran. The president, according to you, has issued 6 ultimatums to restart the war. None of them have come to pass. Do you believe that is because he is speaking and negotiating from a place of net weakness?
Well, you know what they say, Major, 7 times the charm. So let's see what happens when he does it again. But no, the reality is that Trump has shown that he doesn't want to escalate militarily. He's warned by allies in the region that it will cause much more damage. And his own military advisors are saying these aren't really good and effective options. So he's brought all this military to the region. He's paying for them, and the soldiers are out there, and there are thousands and thousands of special forces, but not a lot for them to do that would create a more constructive outcome than where the United States is right now. And so that continues to be fruitless negotiations, endless back and forth, but very little willingness of the Iranians to accept a deal that would make Trump look like he'd gotten more from the Islamic Republic than the old Iranian nuclear deal, the JCPOA, that Trump in his first administration unilaterally withdrew from.
And Ian, there are op-eds being written by those in the MAGA world urging the president to, quote, finish the job. I well remember when George Herbert Walker Bush succeeded perceptibly in the first Gulf War, but then there was a residual sense that he did not finish the job. Is that both a strategic and political peril that the president is looking at?
I think that those are op-eds from a relative minority of MAGA supporters. I think most MAGA supporters want Trump to end wars, to be a peacemaker. That's why before Iran started, he was going around the world telling everybody how many wars he had brought to a close. This one he thought was going to be over very quickly. It hasn't been. He has no one to blame. And, you know, if you can't get the regime out, if you can't rescue the Iranian people, then every further day that you are continuing with this blockade is another day that you're costing his voters at the pump, his voters at the supermarket. And they're going to show up or not in the midterms as a consequence of that. So, I mean, look, not many people read those op-eds compared to 10, 20 years ago. Not many people write those op-eds compared to 10, 20 years ago.
Ian Bremmer, always great stuff. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Major.
Coming up, President Trump's settlement of his lawsuit against the IRS is either getting mixed or evasive reactions from Republicans on Capitol Hill. Our political panel joins me next to discuss. Next here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout, political panel time. You know I love it. Former Michigan Republican Congressman Peter Meijer and Democratic strategist Cameron Frentz. I want to play for you sound today from Capitol Hill about the settlement of the IRS lawsuit by the president against his own government and this idea of a weaponization fund to compensate victims of Biden lawfare. Please listen to this array of sound.
He made a deal with himself. First, unbelievably, he sues the government for $10 billion. Then he says, with his other hand, I am the government, I'll settle for $1.7 billion.
I think that there are and will be, continue to be, a lot of questions around that the administration is going to have to answer.
The Acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, testified yesterday, and he gave a lot of detail, and I'll just defer to what he said. He did not say who will be eligible. There's many details to be filled out on that, and I'm not going to comment on it until that. I'm not going to comment on that until it comes out.
Translation on the Republican side. What are we going to do about this? Peter, what's your sense?
So you have a couple of different things that all came within short succession that are not the issues that Republicans want to be talking about, right? You have the ballroom funding
Yeah, they need these things like a hole in the head.
They don't want these to be the narratives going into the election. Now, I totally understand that the Trump administration holds Congress in contempt. The American people hold Congress in contempt. Congress holds itself in contempt, right?
You're a subject witness on that.
There's a lot of self-loathing to go around, but at the end of the day, there are some things that the president is going to need to pass, and there's a lot of areas where even recalcitrant members could easily get on board. The challenge is the news of the day and what is being talked about, what this administration.
And you've got to get this stuff out of the way before they can get to that stuff they can vote for.
No, because there's important things coming up in the new reconciliation bill. I mean, additional funding to replenish our interceptor stockpiles, building out our defense industrial base. I mean, talking about $50 billion between Defense Production Act and Office of Strategic Capital funding. Like, these are transformational, important things for the good of the country that I'm glad the administration is working on, but we're not talking about that right now, and we should be.
Cameron?
Well, it's very clear the president is off to his favorite, which is self-preservation and making sure that he comes out on top. When you have a situation like what he's done with the IRS and coming up with this very illustrious and interesting plan, it's just not going to work. People see through it. People are tired of being lied to. They see him reaping millions and millions and millions of dollars for his own personal aggrandizement, and it's not tackling the issues. So I think we actually have some agreement here. If they focused on the issues that people want to hear about, reducing costs, bringing down gas prices, it would make a difference. But he's not focused on any of that, and it's all about himself, and this is just ego posturing.
Well, and there are good defenses to be made, potentially, of some of the administration's actions. I mean, when it comes to the need to have a rebuild bunker and replace the PEOC that kind of dates back to the Obama era, there's a lot of things that the administration is working on that Congress could be defending if they were given the right answers, the right clarifications. The more room there is for speculation, the more either the Democrats are filling in the blanks or Republicans are just left in a difficult spot.
Right, and don't have a lot to say, like Senator Thune and Speaker Johnson. They don't have a lot to say about this. They just don't want to define this issue until the administration does a better job of defining it for itself. Peter, you have experience in a primary campaign. Your reaction to what happened to Thomas Massie last night in Kentucky?
Thomas is a friend. I've respected his votes in some places. I've been frustrated by his votes in other places. The reality is that our politics are highly nationalized, and on the Republican side, Donald Trump is the leader of the party. And how principled you may be, how your votes may cast, when it comes time to cast an up or down vote, it's usually not just one thing. It's people can find a million reasons to love you and a million reasons to hate you, and when you get into those crosshairs, it can be challenging. I know that the Trump administration has been very effective at instilling discipline within the party, and they've been very effective. I mean, James Blair has run some fantastic, smart operations.
Former head of legislation at the White House, now the campaign leader in the midterms. Cameron, you got the last word on this. You got about a minute. As a Democrat, I imagine you're happy to see Republicans spend whatever amount of money they want to spend against each other.
Tens of millions of dollars on a race that the president won by some 35 points, which is insane, really, the fact that they had to spend that kind of money in a primary. You have a situation where big night for the president's ego, but doesn't really do much on the electoral side. Math doesn't change. President's still unpopular and trending in the wrong direction. You've got other issues that voters want to hear from. He's talking about a ballroom that's going to be $1 billion investment, but doesn't really do anything to drive down prices. This is a time where the president has clearly lost the ball and is focused more on himself, which is not a surprise given what he's been doing over the last couple of years. But it's very, very clear that it doesn't change the electoral politics come November, and Democrats are still ahead on the generic ballot, up by 10.
Cameron French, I told you get the last word. Indeed, you have. Peter Meyer, always great to see you. Thanks so much for coming in. Appreciate it. Coming up, a call for a college sports boycott in 8 southern states. Why the NAACP is asking black student athletes, alumni, and donors to take their money, their athleticism, and their interest elsewhere. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. The NAACP is calling on black student athletes, fans, and alumni, also meaning donors, to boycott public universities in several southern states over the issue of voting rights. This is a response to a recent Supreme Court decision that weakened Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and several states' subsequent efforts to redraw their congressional maps to remove majority black districts. The organization, the NAACP, has pointed to 8 states. I'll list them for you: Tennessee, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, South Carolina, Texas, and Georgia. opinion columnist for the Los Angeles Times. LZ Granderson joins me now. LZ, let me ask you about this. How does this all land with you in terms of asking athletes, either at the high school level or at the college level, to take up this mantle and boycott first and most visibly?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And second, I mean, this is history. This is not new. This is what young people have always done at the height of every social rights or social justice movement. And this is exactly part of that extension of that. Young people being asked to step up and to try to make their voices heard in matters of importance. If you think about 1968, college athletes were asked to boycott the Olympics in response to racial injustice. So as I said, this is not new for us as a nation.
Speaking of 1968, you have Tommie Smith, John Carlos, you have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but even in more recent, we have Ed O'Bannon, who was crucial in seeking some rights for student athletes in the context of being paid. Is that all part of this continuum?
Well, absolutely, when you consider where the most of the labor is coming from. I mean, if you think about the NAACP's call for a boycott, there were two specific sports. Those are the revenue-driven sports, basketball and football. I don't think we really need to break down the demographics racially of what those sports look like. I think we all have a fair understanding, right? So our labor as Black people in this nation was paramount to help building this nation at its very beginning, and has been paramount throughout the history of this country, and sports is part of that extension. So yes, that is part of this larger conversation, which is about Black people having agency over their bodies and living in a country that doesn't always love them back.
And this had definite legislative repercussions this week, as I'm sure you know, LZ, because there was a piece of legislation in the House ready to come to the floor, the SCORE Act, that would change some methods of name, image, and likeness. What college athletes are they employees? Can they collectively bargain? And it collapsed because the Congressional Black Caucus, related to this issue, withdrew its support. So this is now part of a much broader conversation about all of college athletics and what politics can or cannot accomplish.
Well, I believe that the legislators are using every lever that they have at their disposal in reference to the Congressional Black Caucus. And certainly when you think about some of the other caucuses within the House, they too have used their numbers and power to get bills passed or brought to a vote that they want for their particular caucus. So I don't see anything unusual about that. But what I will say specifically about this case in terms of what's happening with the Voting Rights Act, there's this idea that it was this recent decision. No, this hasn't been a recent decision. This has been a series of decisions that have come from the Supreme Court, systematically trying to dismantle the Voting Rights Act. And that has been something that's been high on the list of Justice Roberts. And so when we talk about this, I don't want it to sort of make it sound as if this is like something that's been recent. No, this has been a slow burning process for this court. And what the NAACP is saying is, let's use every lever that we have at our disposal to put a stop to this, because obviously they're not going to stop. They being whoever wants the South to rise again, they aren't going to stop until all the rights that have happened from 1965 have been revoked.
The NAACP also wants, in addition to high school athletes and college athletes, alumni, donors, and fans to boycott. Do you think that's going to happen?
I think everyone should be thinking about their own consciousness. I talk about this as a Black man. I also talk about this as a gay man. I remember covering a story, Garrett, in which there was a restaurant that was using some of its proceeds to fund anti-gay measures. And it was difficult to get queer people to stop eating at the restaurant because the chicken tastes so good. So I think every single person has to take a personal responsibility about how they feel about this measure and then step forward accordingly. But I like pointing to 1968 for two reasons. One, it was the height of the civil rights movement, and the Olympics was a very powerful statement for two reasons. One, we remember the fist on the podium because men showed up at the Olympics and they didn't boycott. But we don't remember seeing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar because he did boycott. So I think there are powerful ways in which their athletes can support the NAACP's call to a boycott. But for those individuals who don't feel comfortable doing that, there are other ways to stand up and make your voices heard as well.
LZ Granderson, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Coming up, our CBS News radio flashback brings us back to the biggest electoral college victory in modern political history. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back. Now for our CBS radio clip of fame. President Trump describes his 2 election victories as landslides. This is the sound of an actual presidential landslide. President Ronald Reagan's victory over Democratic nominee Walter Mondale in 1984. Now, before we play some of the CBS radio coverage, let us note Reagan's first job after graduating from Eureka College in Illinois was as a radio broadcaster in Davenport, Iowa.
Election night 84. I'm Reed Collins at our CBS News election headquarters in New York. The story began building early in the evening, and it has now grown to the point where Ronald Reagan has some 427 of the electoral seats, the electoral votes, and Walter Mondale still is looking at 3, those 3 coming from the District of Columbia. All of the states that have been decided thus far have gone into the Reagan-Bush column for what could be one of the bigger landslides in American electoral history.
The race was over before the polls closed in the West, but when that happened, the depth and breadth of the Reagan landslide became clearer.
CBS News. This is Charles Osgood at CBS News Election Night headquarters in New York. The polls have just closed in California, and bango, the state of California has gone, as has every other state that has cast its votes so far for Ronald Reagan. Mr. Reagan now has 474 electoral votes, according to our count. Walter Mondale has only the 3 from the District of Columbia. Ronald Reagan has 58% of the vote that's been cast, with 39% of the precincts reporting. Walter Mondale has 42%. In California, according to Deborah Potter, who is with the presidential victory party in Los Angeles, things are all coming up roses. Deborah?
The president is expected in about an hour and a half at the victory celebration here in Los Angeles, where the band is practicing for the party. He's already taken a phone call of congratulations from Vice President Bush, and he told reporters he thinks this election signals a change in American politics.
I think the government has seen other policies that failed, and they've seen there's been a growing tendency to become more aware of the intrusiveness of the federal government and its continued expansion in power. I think this is what's happened, and they see now that a different course works.
The president said he feels sorry for Walter Mondale. In his words, "I'm quite sure there isn't anything I can say to make him feel better." Now that the contest is over, the president said, "I hope we'll close ranks for the good of the country." Deborah Potter, CBS News, at the Reagan Victory Party in Los Angeles.
Reagan won 49 states and 525 electoral votes, the largest share of electoral votes ever won by a Republican then or since. He was also the only presidential nominee to sweep the New England states and the Deep South since 1820. Mondale won 1 state, his home state of Minnesota, by 3,761 votes, or less than 0.2%.
A few minutes ago, I called the President of the United States and congratulated him on his victory for re-election as President of the United States. Please. He has won. We are all Americans. He is our President, and we honor him tonight. Again tonight, the American people in town halls, in homes, in firehouses, in libraries, chose the occupant of the most powerful office on earth. Their choice was made peacefully, with dignity, and with majesty. And although I would have rather won, Tonight we rejoice in our democracy. We rejoice in the freedom of a wonderful people, and we accept their verdict.
In no election since has a candidate won more than 500 electoral votes or the popular vote by double digits. These are the true margins of a landslide, as heard on CBS Radio News. Happy Wednesday, everyone. This is The Takeout, relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Daily Report is next.